Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Michael Morris. Michael, our first story today is about the State of the Nation address. Ramaphosa is tonight going to be giving his first State of the Nation address as the head of the Government of National Unity. And boy, has it been a excitable and rather tumultuous relationship so far between the two main parties, that being the DA and the ANC. Of course, also the IFP and the Freedom Front at times clashing with government as well. We have seen a lot of debates, particularly over three major pieces of legislation. Those were the Bella Bill, which centralizes power in provincial departments in education rather than leaving them to school governing boards on a number of issues. The Expropriation Bill, which provides for cases of so-called nil compensation under an open-ended list, which we think is very damaging to investor confidence in property rights and opens the door to abuse. And the other big challenge that's been going on in government is the national health insurance. This is a piece of legislation that, if fully implemented as envisioned, would completely destroy the private medical aid system and create a state-owned enterprise similar, I guess, to ESCOM that would be responsible purely for deciding on how medical spending is done. Now, if you look at the history of South Africa's other state-owned enterprises over the last decade, that does not fill one with a lot of confidence as to how that would be managed. So these are the big kind of impediments in the background. Unfortunately, all of these are law. There's a lot of contestation about whether they about how they should be implemented. And the Government of National Unity was founded on the promise that it would encourage investment and growth in South Africa and follow evidence-based policymaking. So the State of the Nation address, I guess, is an opportunity for Ramaphosa to show whether he's committed to that or not. Now, there's a tendency, I think, among some people to just kind of discount the State of the Nation address. Often it's a little bit vague, or there's cliches, or there's kind of a lot of things we've heard before. But in terms of how government departments actually write their policy for the year forward, a lot of it is when you get down to the nuts and bolts, is taken from things said in the State of the Nation address. So it does have a real impact on how governance is performed. It also, I guess, will show us whether Ramaphosa is willing at all to compromise on some of the ANC's policy ideas when it comes to the Government of National Unity. And it's really, I think, going to set us up for whether the country is going to sink or swim in the next year or so. Michael, do you agree with all of that? What do you make of what Ramaphosa needs to say tonight in order to, let's say, continue the sugar high that I think is very much ended the Government of National Unity's formation?
Yeah. I mean, you're saying, that the importance of SONA is often the fact that it becomes the sort of reference point for policy thinking and policy justification, and what it is that the government's actually thinking, what it's intending to do through policy, and so on. I think that is important, and I'm reminded of our colleague Chris Patterson's bringing out an element of an earlier SONA just a bit earlier this week, where he cited Cyril Ramaphosa as having said, and I can't quite remember which one. I find it if I didn't lose everything else on my screen here. It probably would have been maybe last year or the year before. I will see if I can find it. In which Ramaphosa spoke about the signal importance of property rights, of title deeds specifically. I've just got it. I will just see if I can find it, because it is quite an interesting little quote. And it'd be interesting to see which SONA it came from. I think this is the one I'm looking for. If you just bear with me for a second. Yeah, in fact, it was July. It was actually the opening of Parliament speech in July 2024. So it was the very first speech he made subsequent to the election, in which, and this is the quote: "The provision of title deeds provides people with the assets they can use to improve their economic position." Now, this is a very plainly stated virtue that the IRR would certainly sign up to. It's central to what we argue. It's central to, I mean, just among other things, that amazing book, Why Nations Failed, published in 2012. The authors, Darren Asamuglu and Stephen Robinson, and one other, I forget his name, won the Nobel Prize for Economics last year. And right throughout that book, they emphasize that nations that avoid the failure that befalls the Venezuelans and the Zimbabweans of this world are ones that, among other things, protect property rights as a very, very high virtue in their work, in their task to serve the public, is protecting property rights. So in the sense that Ramaphosa said title deeds are critical, this is going to enable people to have a stake in the economy, and this is going to be a huge benefit to society. This is very important. Yet here we have a government that has his government that has approved this Expropriation Act, where the ambiguities of which are so great that it in fact poses very great risks to that very important virtue that he has signaled. So there are all these pressures. National health is another case. Any excessive government intervention, overreach into the lives of people in a constitutional democracy, this is contrary to the spirit of property rights, of freedom, and so on. So, and the kinds of things, the agency in the society that lead to enable the society to be successful and to avoid that failure that we do often see in countries where these rights are abrogated. So great pressure on him this evening, I think. Well, one hopes there's great pressure on him. We will certainly be watching very closely. Our colleague Herman Pretorius today issued a press statement, or wrote a press release, which expresses exactly why the IRR is obsessed with growth and obsessed with property rights, because this is where the freedom that South Africans crave, and on which the success of the country depends, resides in these positions that the government takes, the policies that they approve, the agency that they are prepared to grant to people, and obviously property rights is a key one there. So
right.
you have to highlight, the importance of
you want to end poverty. You want to improve race relations. You want to see South Africa achieve its potential, where its people are able to actually live as they want to live. Property rights are the basic line there. Deregulation of places that are overregulated is important. And if Ramaphosa doesn't announce some steps in that direction, we're going to continue to bump along at sub 2% growth, which is, I think, currently what the estimates are for us for the next couple of years. And that means poverty will continue, and the suffering of South Africans, from rich to poor, will continue.
Exactly. This is not rocket science. There are so many cases around the world. Terence Corrigan, another colleague, earlier this week spoke about the importance of property rights in securing and shoring up a constitutional democracy, because it is an anchoring right. People have a property right. They are beyond the reach and the dependency of the state, or dependency on the state. So they are free agents in society. That's what makes societies dynamic, buoyant, successful. So exactly right, yeah.
So let's just zoom in a little bit on the national health insurance. There's been some question, and we talked about it on the show yesterday, about whether the DA had managed to extract some concessions from the ANC on the national health insurance, and it kind of looks like they have, but without Motsoaledi's assent to the concessions. So Aaron Motsoaledi, the health minister, has been fiercely opposed to any attempts to reduce the scope or rework the NHI. Described it as a war. He's talked about this as a nefarious plan to prevent the poor from having access to good healthcare. I think it was also perhaps a little bit of a conflict of interest that with the NHI essentially under the control of his department, he would become one of the most powerful patronage givers in the country, but let's not get bogged down in that. The DA's leader, John Steenhuisen, yesterday in an interview announced that it looks like the DA has been promised that the national health insurance will be taken out of the medium-term development plan. Now, what's this? This is basically the plan for the next 5 years. showing what things can be funded and what government's priorities are going to be, that sort of thing. So it's very important here. Motsoaledi had apparently in one of the earlier drafts actually slipped in a provision that would abolish all private medical aids by the end of the medium-term development plan in 2029. The DA objected to that, had a big fight with the ANC over it. And it kind of looks now, while NHI is going to remain on the books and sort of be the official law and policy of the land, it's just not going to be funded. That seems to be the compromise that they've worked out. Now, I may be oversimplifying there. There may be nuances I'm missing. But, I mean, that's not great. This is still going to cause problems, uncertainties, and we're not going to get to a better healthcare system when we have this kind of moribund law sitting on the books. But at least it will perhaps limit the damage if this project simply doesn't get the money that it needs to actually start being implemented. What do you make of this, Michael?
Yeah, I think you're right. And my feeling about a lot of the sort of big picture policy positions is that it's probably going to take a while for them to shift and to be kind of shifted out of the picture. For a number of reasons. I mean, I do very much agree with Frans Cronje, former bosses, Frans Cronje's assessment of the sort of current political arena, where you have the two key parties being the DA and the ANC, representing essentially the urban population of South Africa, which is growing. It's, I think, already 67% of South Africa is urban, and likely to grow to 80%, I think, by 2050, according to the UN Habitat research. So the urban space is really the thing to watch. This is really where most people are. It's where most people want to be. Is where all the activities is happening. But it's two very different kinds of constituencies, I think. And the one quite familiar with the other, but not altogether. And there's an element of mistrust. There's an element of enmity, maybe even envy, all kinds of complicated things. The history obviously is very conflictual, but nevertheless, this is the shared reality. We are all sharing these spaces, and we're having to share the resources and so on. And I think gradually, as people begin to see, and I think we've seen this already, more and more people becoming members of medical aid, that there is an advantage in expanding that, rather than thinking that what we've got to do is redistribute the money that's being spent on medical aids by the better off, and somehow put that into some kind of state service. That in fact maybe the better thing is to expand the opportunity for more private medical aid, and to use. I mean, the thing that I thought was quite interesting in John Steenhuisen's statement, where he was saying that the ministerial advisory committee would involve players in the private sector as well as healthcare officials, representatives of the healthcare industry, and the ministry. And I think as soon as you start getting this sort of sharing of minds of people who are supposedly on opposite ends of some or other equation, and they discover really that they're all working towards the same objective, I think that begins to kind of loosen the rigidity of the opposition, or the adversarialism of these debates. And I think the more that happens, the more likely we are going to see shifts and more sensible policy emerging.
So I guess it'll be really interesting to see what Ramaphosa announces today, and then in the budget that will follow this, is if there suddenly is a big bunch of funding for NHI, even if it's not enough, because government, quite frankly, doesn't have enough money to fund NHI, regardless of what Minister Motsoaledi wants to do. But if they do pour some money into its implementation, it'll be a lot like, I think, pouring water into the sand, in the sense that it won't make a difference to anyone's lives, but it'll just be a waste. And that, I think, will probably put the GNU in danger. But if indeed this compromise is as Steenhuisen describes, and that they just say, oh, we're going to work out more details and the can get kicked further down the road, that is probably a win of sorts for the DA. But the ANC will want to very much portray it as not being a win, and that we're just rejigging things. There's no compromise here. So that, I think, will be interesting to watch. All right, very briefly, our last topic today, and it's related. basically to everything we're talking about here, and that is there's a forthcoming report from our sister organization, the Center for Risk Analysis, which is just giving some stats on where the country's at in terms of employment. We do this every year. We produce chapters on various aspects of South Africa's conditions, social and economic and political. And this table that one of our colleagues shared with us was just quite striking, and it was about the unemployment by province across the country. So we've got a bunch of provinces that are between 45 and 50% unemployed. That's significantly higher than the national average, which is 42% on the expanded definition. The Eastern Cape, the Free State, Gauteng, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Northwest are all over 45% unemployment rates. In fact, the Northwest is 54% unemployed, which is a horrific number. More people do not have jobs than do. And then you've got the provinces that are slightly lower, KZN with just under 45%, the Northern Cape with just under 45%. But here's the interesting one, the outlier, Western Cape with 27% unemployment. Now, that's still a very high number compared to other countries in the world, but I think this is a point that our colleague Terence Corrigan has often brought up, which is that even with all of the bad policies that South Africa has, if you get some of the basics right, you can make a significant difference. It's the theory of what they call good enough governance. You don't actually have to change everything. Small changes in the right places can make a significant impact. They don't solve the problem, but they get you down the road towards it. What do you make of this, Michael?
I think that's absolutely right. And in our sort of pre-show chat, we were sort of throwing ideas about this around, and I think there's potentially a kind of penalty that if you can do good enough governance for a while and you manage to bring maybe your unemployment rate down to 27.3% as opposed to 54.2% in Northwest, then you think we're doing fine. And I think there's a certain element of the South African, it's not optimism entirely, it's a kind of a South African ability to sort of get on and think the best of things and so on, and then to not worry too much about expropriation law or the NHI or whatever the case might be, because we can say, well, we're doing pretty well. So on the one hand, it's great. I think it's very good, and I think the Western Cape does make big effort to do the day-to-day stuff well. Provincially, they're constantly working on economic plans, looking at agri parks and transport networks, and pushing to get control over transport and the harbour and all these sorts of things. So it's very active, dynamic sort of government under Alan Winde, and the city, of course, under Jordan Hill-Lewis, also very similar sort of can-do, let's get cracking approach. Just recently, just anecdotally, my wife happened to notice that quite nearby in Newlands, on a Saturday morning, there was this whole queue of people from the at the Newlands swimming pool, which for years had been, nobody had really ever gone there. There were all these people lining up with baskets and umbrellas and so on, because it had been opened. It was now this great place to go. And this is Swimming Pools of Cape Town has been one of Jordan Hill-Lewis's recent projects, one of many. So he's that kind of guy. It's that kind of place. I think there's that optimism, dynamism, and it does breed the sort of environment which maybe does contribute to this 27.3% unemployment rate. So yeah, day-to-day stuff very important, but one should be careful of not losing sight of the sort of bigger risks that lurk in the larger sort of policies.
No, well said. And it is also quite the contrast from municipalities in the Northwest, where people are given a number of non-functioning donkey carts to take them to hospital rather than building a road, which is like absolutely sort of government just kind of giving up and then just hoping that it can like bribe the electorate with something that might work, which is it's a depressing state of affairs. And I think it's an incredible contrast between the two. And what you can achieve with even changes in local government if you get the basics right. But 27% unemployment, that's not nearly good enough. There's still a long way for South Africans to go. and to do that, we're going to have to change some of the rules at the top, some of the laws in Parliament.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see what Ramaphosa produces tonight in the State of the Nation address, and I'm sure we'll talk about that tomorrow in the longer version of the show. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone. The Daily Friend Show and the Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR, or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.